Welcome everybody. On today's show, we have a question for you. Now, we all want to be healthy, capable human beings who can achieve our dreams and overcome challenges. So what is it that stops us? My name is Jeremy Sutton, coming to you from Niigata, Japan.
And I'm Simon Dalrymple, coming to you from Bangkok, Thailand.
And this is the Art of Awareness podcast, episode 4, Resistance. When it comes to creativity, productivity, or becoming our best self in any endeavor, there's probably no more seminal book than Steven Pressfield's The War of Art. And the central topic in this book is resistance. So Simon, what is resistance?
Well, what is the feeling of waking up early in the morning when your alarm's going off and you're very comfortable waking from your dreams? You know, what is the feeling of needing to take out the rubbish when it's overflowing in your garbage bin, right? But you know, there's something inside you that just stops you from doing the thing that you know you need to do. That is the voice of resistance, and it really shows up everywhere in our lives, from when we wake up first thing in the morning, and do we wake up with a sigh, or do we wake up ready to face our day, all the way up to, you know, are we achieving our dreams? Are we actually being the people and living the lives that we want to lead?
Yeah, nice. And absolutely. I mean, we have endless opportunities to experience resistance. I know I feel it every morning. Just today, I wake up and I'm thinking, you know what, it's time to go meditate. And I have this little voice on the side of me that says, oh, you know, you could meditate, or you could keep listening to that audiobook that you were enjoying last night. It's like, right. No, Jeremy, you got to go meditate because that's what you do first thing. That right there is resistance. And I like the point that you made where, yeah, it affects us on the little things, you know, on just like what do we do every day. But funny enough, it's this resistance to do the little things day in and day out that stops us from achieving those big, huge dreams down the road as these effects continually compound over time.
Absolutely. And that links into what we were talking about with habits. You know, it's resistance leads to the establishment of bad habits, because it's hard to, as we talked about, it's hard to establish a new pattern in your life. It takes willpower, really, and it takes overcoming that resistance. That's what stops you from giving up smoking, or what stops you from sitting down every day for 5 minutes or 10 minutes for some mindfulness, or it's what stops you from reading that book that's been on your mind endlessly for years and years and years, but you haven't just quite got around to reading it yet. Right. It shows up in all these areas, and whenever we want to establish a habit and move ourselves systematically towards a better version of who we want to be, then resistance will show up. In fact, Pressfield kind of talks about it in that way. He says, whenever resistance shows up, you'll know that a dream is nearby, you know, or something in your life that you're trying to improve on is close to resistance. Resistance is almost the other side of the coin to that thing that you want to achieve. So in a way, it's a positive thing, because you can say, okay, I have resistance because this is clearly a good idea. You know, this is clearly something valuable in my life. I found that with meditation, as I mentioned, I think in the first podcast, I was saying I knew that the difficulty of it meant that it was something I should do more often.
Absolutely.
I knew that the fact that I was resistant to just sitting down and meditating, and at that point knowing that it was valuable and was helpful for me, that's what resistance was. You know? And that was that voice that was stopping me from doing it. Yeah,
I mean, there's so many metaphors and like quotes over the years that point to the same idea. You know, when people say you should do something every day that scares you, well, they're pointing to overcoming resistance. When we think about just all of the symbolic metaphors throughout the ages, I mean, we have that angel and the devil on our shoulder. We have that devil who's whispering in our ear to do the easy thing, to do the lazy thing, to pursue the seven deadly sins, which, you know, all religion aside, what are the 7 deadly sins? Well, those are the 7 things that we love to do naturally, that we don't have to.
7 impulses almost.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the things that we don't have to train ourselves to want to do because they arise naturally. It's like, oh, do you like...
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, do you like delicious food? You know, do you like sex? Do you like feeling good? Do Does it make you jealous when other people have stuff that you would like to have? It's like these are natural impulses that are rooted, in our, as it turns out, not just in our metaphors, but it's rooted in our biology as well.
Right. I think that ties in well with someone that we've spoken about before. Paul MacLean's got the idea of the triune brain theory about how our brains grow on previous structures that have existed. Our brain didn't just fully form as the incredible piece of hardware that it is. It grew and developed as we have grown and developed as a species, right? So
absolutely.
It began with the reptilian brain stem, and then the mammalian emotional center, and then on top of that, a higher functioning neocortex. So we have these opposing kind of heritages from our evolutionary past that are always driving us in different ways. We have those basic drives, those instincts towards self-gratification, right?
Absolutely.
It's really at the root of our neurobiology.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, we have other higher functions, higher aims, higher goals, higher purposes, which are at odds. And I think that's at the center, the kind of biological center of this talk of resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, everybody loves to think of themselves as completely rational human beings. That's like that's
in the driving seat.
Absolutely, yeah. But our worded thoughts, which are the ones that we really identify with, are really just like the waves on the top of the ocean. When there's all these emotional currents and these just like survival currents that are taking us from the thin layer of the surface of the ocean all the way down to the ocean floor.
Definitely.
90% of what goes on in our brain, it goes on outside of conscious awareness. So, we all like to think that we make decisions and then kind of have the emotions. But I mean, if you study anything about psychology, the science of persuasion, sales and marketing, you see this all over the place, that essentially we tend to have an emotional drive first, and then just at the end, our thoughts come in and rationalize those emotional appeals after the fact. Now, of course, it's hard to notice this because it's happening at like the speed of thought, and and we don't even, our conscious self doesn't even exist until the end of that process. And so when we're talking about noticing resistance, we're really talking about metacognition. We're about thinking about our own thoughts and becoming aware of sort of the natural currents that our mind is running on all the time.
And that brings up an interesting question for me about living your life in that kind of state of metacognition. This is obviously related to, in my mind, to meditation. And when you're meditating, it is a form of kind of formalized metacognition, because you are watching the thoughts as they are coming up rather than actually thinking the thoughts.
Right.
I mean, and that's what happens when you metacognize. It's a form of thinking rather than a form of looking. But when a thought comes up, you're thinking about the nature of that thought rather than thinking it yourself. And so is it possible to live your life from that perspective? That's something that I think about. Someone like the Dalai Lama, do they live constantly in that state of I guess non-resistance? Because resistance seems to only come up when we identify with these emotional states,
right.
when we are becoming our thought process rather than stepping out of that stream, or being able to metacognize and look at the process as it's happening, or perhaps just slightly after it's happened. As you say, it's very hard to catch these things when they're happening in real time. I mean, what do you think about that? Is it something that we can sustain for periods of time, or is it more something that just like, okay, I noticed that resistance was there, and now I'm aware of it? Is it something you can be aware of before it comes up?
Yeah, so with everything, there are definitely stages.
There's about 4 questions.
Yeah, I know. We'll just take it in a couple different directions. So, I mean, there's a couple things here. First off, so is that state of metacognition, one question is like, is that the spot to be all the time? Can you be in that spot all the time? And, there's a couple stages here. First off, there's kind of 4 stages of awareness for anything. And that is, at first, we're unconsciously unaware, as in, we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
So for example, like in this case, it's like, for me, before I had read Pressfield's The War of Art, I didn't really understand, I didn't think of resistance as a thing that I dealt with daily, even though it already was. So I was unaware that resistance was influencing my life. And then when I read Pressfield, boom, I became consciously unaware or consciously unknowing, as in I was aware of all the things I didn't know all of a sudden. I went from not knowing what I didn't know to knowing, or at least having an idea that there was stuff that I didn't know.
Getting to that kind of Socratic state of my intelligence is in the fact that I know how little I know.
Right. And then we start, stage 3 really is the stage of metacognition, where now that we've realized that like resistance is a thing, now we can knowingly become aware. So in other words, this is like taking
That's where the work comes in.
Right, this is where it's where the work comes in, and actually taking the time to be like, hey, I know that I'm falling short on this part. I know that there's something here, there's fruit to be gained, but it's going to take some work. And so this is where like the metacognition starts to really come into play, because for example, when we're meditating, we start off and like you said, we're just kind of in the flow of all our thoughts. We can't even realize that it's possible to kind of take some distance from that. Then we become aware that we can have some distance, and then we can observe those thoughts. So as a thought comes up, we might think about those thoughts. But eventually, we actually want to move past that, where we become unconsciously aware, unconsciously capable, or we become, you might say, we gather intuition. So for example, ultimately, like you mentioned the Dalai Lama, is he living in a state of like constant self-reflection? I don't think he's thinking about it that much, because he's internalized the awareness so thoroughly that essentially it's intuition to him. Now he can just perform these actions. He's conditioned himself to perform the actions that he wants his mind to be. So another way to think about this is, when we're young, and especially before we know, when we're unconsciously unaware, we're conditioned, our thoughts, our ideas are conditioned by things around us. Then we become aware of that we've been conditioned a certain way, and then we can decide how we want to be conditioned from there. That's where the metacognition and the active resistance starts to come up, as our previous kind of mind state starts to resist the changes. And over time, through constant practice, through our daily habits, we can actually internalize our new conditioning, so that now we are unconsciously capable. So we're just intuitively doing the things that we want to be doing. We've conditioned ourselves mindfully to naturally behave the way that we kind of want to behave.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it does come down to a choice, but that choice only appears, as you say, once you've become aware of the fact that this force of resistance, or really, again, resistance is just a symbol, isn't it, for this feeling of that stops you from achieving what you want to achieve, what you know is going to be beneficial for you. I remember that you told me a great story that's used, I think, by the Cherokee Indians to kind of represent when you share that one now. It's the one about the wolves inside our hearts.
Absolutely.
It's a very poetic description.
Absolutely. I'm probably going to butcher the story, but the idea is there. And essentially it's that, a young man and an elder are speaking, and the elder tells the young man, inside of us, there are two wolves. The white wolf is the wolf of love, compassion, of caring, and the black wolf, excuse the ancient metaphors and the colorful symbolism, but the dark wolf is the evil wolf, the greed, fear, desire, and just our selfish tendencies. And these two wolves are at a constant battle with each other. And the young man asks the elder, well, which one will win? And the elder responds, it depends on which one you feed.
Right, and that's it, isn't it? It's really an act of will at a certain point, at that sort of stage 3 of awareness, when you are aware of resistance in your life, and you know that it exists, and now you have a choice. Are you going to continue to try to be aware of it, and to continue to practice things like meditation or metacognition and things that are going to keep you aware of resistance, or are you just going to accept it for what it is in your life and just continue on autopilot? It does come down to a choice fundamentally about the way in which you want to live your life.
Absolutely.
And I think that's difficult, because once you are aware of this force of resistance, it's like you can't ignore it anymore. Mm-hmm. You know that it's a constant thing. It's like the tide, it's constantly just like coming in. The water line is continually pushing itself against you. It feels, it's strange how universal that is. I think to all of us.
Absolutely. I think for me, one of my personal experiences in kind of coming to notice resistance, although this was before I really had a term for it. This was back when I first started meditating, and I was in college. And one of the first books I read about meditation was a really simple overview, but in that book, it talks about the type of things that end up distracting us during meditation.
Right.
And he says things like cravings or agitation or aversions, like not wanting things, or fantasies. This kind of mix comes into play, creeps into our mind, and takes us away from the activity of meditating. And as I sort of had this new lens to like notice how, hey, these are the different like strategies that my mind has to distract me. I was going to class, and I was sitting in class, and I realized that all the things that were distracting me in my meditation were the exact same things that were distracting me during my class. And I would be sitting there, and I would be like, oh, I wonder when this class gets over, because I want to go do da 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 da. And then I'd be like, wait a minute, that's craving. Oh, there's a fantasy. Oh, and then I would notice it, kind of like let it go, and then try to bring it back to the class. And that was sort of like the time that I first started to realize for myself how this resistance was not only affecting my meditation, but it was like creeping into literally everything that I was doing in my whole life,
Absolutely. And so, I mean, the way that we're painting resistance makes it sound like this dark, relentless force, that we're constantly fighting against. I mean, and there are ways, of course, of dealing with resistance in your life. What are some of the key practices or ideas that you've come across in terms of facing resistance and how you can really make it, in fact, work for you in your life?
Yeah. Well, there's so much going on. I'm a student of psychology myself, and having the good fortune to have traveled in Asia and studied Buddhism and yoga on a fairly extensive level, and kind of confronting these forces in my own life, I've been lucky enough to put together a handful of techniques that have seemed to be helpful. And I mean, to start off, we talked about this before, but just getting ideas out of your head and capturing them in writing is just an invaluable way to start. Because, for example, we do have these different drives. Part of me does know, or thinks it knows, what's better for me. And, we should talk about self-control here, but we'll come back to that. So part of me has a vision for what the good life is for me, or, the ideal of who do I want to be. I want to be a healthy person who is, able to contribute to the world and contribute to the people around me, and who's not a constant drain on other people's energy and time, who people actually enjoy or benefit from being around. So if I have this vision of who I would like to be, well, that vision is kind of like a weak little seedling. It's not really here yet. So you have to sort of plant that idea. And one way that you sort of let that idea take root is to really clearly identify, what are you going for? What is the ideal outcome of this development? What is the ideal outcome of who I want to be? And what would that even look like in a practical day-to-day basis? Now, once you get the vision, then, there are all sorts of techniques here. Ultimately, we're talking about a paradigm shift where when we're young, we tend to identify with those sort of selfish desires. When we're a child, we don't have desires. We are those desires. You can't even imagine wanting something else. You want that cookie? There's no way to get that cookie from your mind, because you are that desire for that cookie.
How do you not choose the cookie?
Yeah.
There's no possibility of reflection.
Not at all. Because we're identified, like the desire is like bigger than who we are, but as we sort of come at it, we all start there. So we all start identified with that side of us. But as we sort of come out of that, or we develop the abilities to notice that that's happening, we can sort of take this mechanism, take control of this mechanism. So when we go to for example, let's say we have a split there where we notice these desires, and we also notice that we have a higher vision, or a more comprehensive, or a more high-reaching vision about like what we really want to do with our lives. Well, now this is where the resistance comes in, because my old sort of biological desires are there, and my new vision hasn't quite taken hold. Well,
right.
If I'm sort of stuck between those, sometimes I feel the identity of the old desires, and sometimes I identify with working towards my vision. Well, I'm in the middle of a paradigm shift. Now, there was a really huge switch in my life where when I realized, for example, some of the things I really want to do, then when I would notice that resistance would come up, instead of taking pleasure in kind of giving into that resistance, I would actually find pleasure in beating that resistance. I'd be like, part of me would come up and be like, no, we don't want to meditate. We don't want to do the hard thing of the exercise. We don't want to eat that good food. And part of me would be like, yeah, actually, over here on this shoulder, we do want to do that. And when you do make the good choice, you realize you did the better thing. And boom, you actually get that sort of kick of pleasure from beating that resistance.
And that can happen on a very small scale. I think it's important to chunk that down to, it's not, okay, I'm going to beat resistance by quitting smoking immediately. Well, maybe just try and be aware of that resistance when you wake up in the morning. Just become aware of, like, how do you feel when you wake up? You probably feel pretty comfortable when you don't want to get out of bed. Well, everyone that's a universal feeling. I'm sure even the Dalai Lama wakes up on his straw mat and to some extent feels that sense of, it would be nice to stay here. Just becoming aware of that in your experience then leads to you being able to decide, well, no, I'm not going to give in to that voice, that temptation of the easy instinctual action. I'm actually going to choose, as you say, what's closer to the person that I actually want to become. How do you become the person you want to be? Well, you start acting like that person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And then you do it again and again and again and again. And eventually it becomes much easier. But I think you're right. You have to notice these things first, but just starting on a very micro level, I think, is the key here.
Absolutely, because so the question is, how do you make this like paradigm shift from kind of identified with the drives to identified with the vision of the higher self? Because I mean, if you can make that shift, then basically the work becomes easy. For example, if to take an older example, Martin Luther King did not feel like, man, I got to go give another talk today, how much work this is, because he identified so strongly with the outcome of civil rights and, spreading prosperity for all humans, that doing the harder thing, which it is hard to write a speech, it is hard to get up in front of people, even if you're a great speaker, it is difficult to do these things. It takes work, but for him, the desire to overcome that resistance, and he was, on a super stratified, super symbolic, larger level, he was overcoming a nation's resistance, that individual resistance, like personified on the national level. And, but, because it was such a worthy cause for him, he had made that paradigm shift that it wasn't that hard for him, and in fact, it could actually be enjoyable to do the work, to do the better thing, to do the higher self thing. So, the question is, though, how do you start to make that shift from one side to the other? And you were just mentioning some excellent tips. First off, you got to start from wherever you're at. That's the best place to start, is wherever you are. That's always the case. Some people look at how far there is to go and think, oh man, well, there's so far to go. Like, what's the point of even starting? Well, there's always a point in starting, and it's best to start where you're at. And the key here is to log little wins every single day.
Yeah.
If it's like 5 minutes of cleaning, like set a goal of cleaning your room for 5 minutes, but doing something where you specifically write down a goal, 5 minutes of meditation, 5 or 10 minutes of cleaning my room every day, doing exercise 4 days a week, studying or reading this many books in a month, reading 1 hour a day, setting a goal and, making that goal something that you have to sort of stretch for, and then taking the small steps on a daily basis and consistently overcoming that resistance. This is definitely the initial sort of jump into making that shift, because with every single little win, we start to generate momentum. We start to generate a positive feedback loop that once this positive feedback loop gets going, it's basically hard to stop doing what you're doing.
Right, it becomes a spiral as well. It kind of leads upwards as well as as well as just continually feeding itself. It moves you higher up your chain of development. Undoubtedly, it's just a mechanism that works as long as you make it work for you.
Right.
Yeah.
The more you do, the more you can do.
That's it. Yeah.
Your meditation habit is a good example of this. Really, as you got started, you started to log the daily wins, and now it would be harder for you to probably miss a day than it would be to get it.
Sure. And of course, I do still feel that resistance at different times, particularly when I deviate from my habit. If I do it in the morning, which for me is the best time of day to do it, then it's enjoyable. It's a part of my day that it begins my day in the best frame of mind. And I feel like I've already logged a win, logged a victory. Just at the start of my day when I've done that. If I forget to do it, or I don't have time, or for some reason, resistance comes up and gives me an excuse to not do it, then later in the day, I find it harder still. Although it's funny, I still have that voice of resistance, that little devil on my shoulder saying, "Well, Simon, do you really want to meditate now? It's getting a bit late. Maybe you should eat first. Aren't you hungry?" Like that voice does still come up, but the other voice is louder now, and
right.
I've fed that wolf enough now that that's the one that's in control of my actions, and but through consistent effort really is what it came down to.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because once you start to log those little wins, and you start now on a meditation habit, and then pretty soon you start to that becomes easier, and then all of a sudden you notice that now you're meditating and doing some exercise, and now you're doing, after a while, you're doing meditation, exercise, and getting 30 minutes of reading in every day, and now your creativity at work has gone up, and now who knows? In my case, I've stopped working for other people and started the path to solo entrepreneurship, and that's been going really well, but these things feed into each other. Each little win kind of builds off the previous one, and pretty soon it's more fun to do the harder thing. Funny enough.
Absolutely. And especially when you can find people that also are trying to do something similar in their own life, who are trying to face their own resistance. It manifests itself in very personalized ways, but we all do face this force that stops us from achieving what we want, and you have a wonderful phrase you said before about how we all have to walk our own path, but we don't have to walk it alone. We can walk it together, and so absolutely. Here at the Art of Awareness, we're very much interested in other people's experiences with resistance. If anyone has any questions about what we're talking about any of the references we use, or any of the ideas that we discuss during the podcast, then they should definitely get in touch with us through what means, Jeremy? What ways people have?
Absolutely. Well, first off, you can head over to precisionprinciple.com, and there's a contact form there where at any moment you can send me an email, jeremy@precisionprinciple.com. I'll put a link down in the description in the show notes below. And, one excellent way is, I've mentioned it before, but I wrote the short ebook called The Game. And the game is specifically built around this concept of the fact that we have two selves inside of us. The idea of self-control means that there's at least two people, two selves up in this brain of ours. Because there's one that wants to do something, and there's another that has the ability to control that other self, right? So if you have self-awareness, self-control, or even selflessness, all these terms are pointing to the fact that if you think about it closely, we have more than one voice, self, belief system, ideas going on in our mind at the same time. So absolutely. I would highly recommend for people to head over to precisionprinciple.com, pick up a set of instructions for the game, because the game is built on building the habits that help you identify resistance day in, day out, how to move through that third stage of awareness from actively working on what you want to know to actually moving to that fourth stage where we're getting into flow states, where we're not worried about resistance because we're overcoming resistance so readily that now what's happening is we can sink back into that sort of reunite both sides of our mind, but this time working together in efforts to achieve our higher purpose, where instead of working against our resistance, now we have both sides kind of pulling ourselves forward together and achieving our dreams with, just head and shoulders speed above the rest. So
absolutely.
So on that note, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. It's been excellent to have you here. As Simon mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, contact us personally. We'd love to get in touch. We'd love to hear your thoughts and let us know what we can do to help you in your journey as well. Because like Simon mentioned, the path to mastery is a difficult one, and we all have to walk that path ourselves, but we don't have to walk it alone. So let's make this a community effort, and let's all take our lives to that next level, wherever that happens to be for all of us. So my name is Jeremy Sutton, coming to you from Niigata, Japan.
And I'm Simon Dalrymple, coming to you from Bangkok, Thailand.
And this has been the Art of Awareness podcast. Thank you, and have a great day.